Hey guys, this is David from the Young Folks, and I am back today to talk about episodes 4 and 5 of Get a Life. So, episode 4, A Family Affair, I actually had not seen before. I had thought that I'd watch episodes 1 through 6, but YouTube marked a few episodes wrong, so hadn't seen that one. And episode 5, Pile of Death, I had seen. So, I'll tell you what I thought about the episodes, but I'm going to add a little more to this installment, per se. I'd like to talk a little bit about what it means for a show to have a cult following, which I know is not exactly a definite conversation because I've had conversations with my friends and we sometimes disagree on what it means. And I'm not the be all end all, so this is just my opinion. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how expectation can play into a show like Get a Life, but I'll talk about that in the end. So I'll tell you what I thought about the episodes. So, to be honest, I am not a fan of episode 4, A Family Affair. And maybe I'm looking into this too much. This is the Chris Elliott sitcom, so maybe I'm just being a little bold here. But there's some sexism in this episode that, while subtle, put a bad taste in my mouth. This episode kind of helped me to realize that the character of Sharon, who's Chris's best friend's wife, is a very one-note character. Her whole purpose on being the show is saying mean things about Chris, being a nasty character, and for some reason dressing like she's from the 50s. I think that's like parodying sitcoms. I don't know. And yeah, I just think it's not even the actress's fault. She's fine. I think it's just the writing for her character. And as far as I can tell, unless they add more, there's only really 2 female characters on this show. One of which being Chris's mother, who's fine. She's the mother character. And the other of which being her. And to have a character that's so one note be your only other female character is such a shame to me. Especially on a show like Get a Life, which does have clever writing. And I just think for a show that, when you look back on it, there's a lot of things to like. It's just a disappointing aspect of it for me. And the plot of the episode is that Sharon is hosting a dinner party, and that her sister, Charlene, is in town. And Chris barges into the party, and the other guests leave after Chris tells a story about his dream in which a turkey chases him down a supermarket aisle with a knife. And Chris and Charlene start to date. And Sharon's furious. So, the other sexist thing in this episode, I think, is even though Charlene, who's just like a guest character, her whole purpose is to be like the butt end of the joke of Chris Elliott is dating someone good looking. They're having sex. No. I don't really think she has any real dialogue scenes, like interacting with a lot of people until the end of the episode. And it's not the worst, but it put a bad taste in my mouth. I just thought for a show that's kind of well known for being edgy and doing interesting things, it disappointed me that it wasn't like they were making fun of gender roles or anything. They just didn't do a great job writing female characters here. And honestly, Chris Elliott's character, he's annoying, but I find him to be endearingly annoying. In this episode, he's mostly funny, but there are a few things he says that are just a little bit sexist. So, if you don't agree, if you don't see this episode as too sexist, it doesn't bother you, fine. It just put a bad taste in my mouth. But with that being said, and this can be said for the whole show of Get a Life, this episode has good moments. Get a Life is a show that is not exactly great, but it dabbles in great moments. And the best things in this episode are actually the things that are making fun of other sitcoms. Or just Chris Elliott doing weird things, that's kind of the show. To give away one, at least, or 2, I won't ruin too much because, these are short episodes, only 23 minutes. In the beginning of the episode, they make fun of that thing they do in 90s sitcoms when someone sees another person and they see fireworks and they show, like, all these images of, like, nice things and the person just staring there adoringly going, So when Chris sees Charlene, and at first he sees fireworks, then he sees like stock footage of a giraffe eating eucalyptus leaves or something. Then he sees a John Doe piling dirt on the ground, and it's just all these weird, surreal images. And there's no laugh track again because Fox only laughs at the most literal of things, so that cracked me up. And the joke I liked the most was in the end of the episode, when I was actually hoping they were going to do this earlier and was bummed out when they didn't, but then they saved it for the best for last. My friend and I have actually talked about how on Seinfeld, in particular, we always thought it was so strange in shows when people are thinking about things, like just thinking like, huh, what am I going to do? Am I going to go to the store? Where am I going to go? But while they're thinking this in the voiceover, they're making the weirdest faces. They're like, and so Chris Elliott's kind of doing that in the end, and he's thinking things in his head, and she's like doing little flashbacks, and then Sharon and Todd are just at the top of the stairs, and they're like, yeah, he'll leave at some point, and they just turn the lights off, and Chris is like standing there still doing it. So they kind of mention the fact that it's kind of weird. Then they turn the lights off, and Chris is like, I'm blind. So on a whole, this is not a very good episode. It's kind of dated, somewhat sexist. It's got its moments. If you're gonna watch the show, there's no harm in watching it, but it's my least favorite so far. So moving on to the next episode, Pile of Death. This one's got a clever concept, which is that Chris goes to his old playground, his old childhood playground, and it's in total disarray. There's like glass on the ground. All the swing sets are broken. There's like rabid animals. But Chris goes back and he's overcome by nostalgia, so he decides that he wants to raise money to save the park, which is going to be torn down by the city. So he decides to try to break a world record, having the most stuff piled on him, pretty much. And once again, I think my favorite parts of this episode are the little things that make fun of other sitcoms. Like when Chris is at the playground, there are all these vocal flashbacks. Like he'll be by the swing set and he'll remember something he did on the swing set when he was younger. So he's like by the swing set, admiringly looking at it. And you'll hear in the back like, ow, Chris, don't push me that hard. Ah, I think my leg's broken. And Chris is just like laughing. He's like, ha ha ha, good times. And then there's another point when he's like, I must save this park. And above his head, like his little paperboy friends, they're like floating heads, really bad 90s special effects pop up. And they're like, save the park, Chris, save the park. And Chris is like, I will, boys, I will. And then they keep saying it. They're like, help us, Chris, help us. He's like, I heard you. Stop it. And he starts like swatting at them. And it's silly, but it works, I think. And so I don't want to ruin too much about the episode. But it might go on a bit too long. But it's the visuals are fun, are like wacky when they show all the stuff piled on Chris. There's a lot of silly jokes. Like there's one when it's the doctor keeps saying like, I don't condone this. And you see, like, what you think is blood trickle out of Chris's mouth. And they're like, you should really stop giving him tomato juice. And he's like, it's very acidic. So make fun of that. It makes it look very graphic. And in the end, they even make fun of the pointless celebrity cameo thing throughout the episode. Chris's parents want to go see Jack Jones. Yeah, that's a pretty dated reference. That's, the guy who did The Impossible Dream, like, on the radio, the famous version. Kind of like a Sinatra ripoff type guy. And in the end of the episode, he shows up, and he's like, the traffic jammed here, what's going on here? And like, sing a song. It's like, okay, whatever. So he just sings a song, and it's silly, but it's funny, I think. And it's not the greatest episode, but once again, there are good moments in it. And so now talking about what I was talking about a cult following before. What's interesting about a lot of shows that have cult followings is that at the time they were made, they weren't really trying to be big things. Like, I feel like, even though I say to myself, don't expect too much from Get a Life, I've heard the claims that there's, like, graphic, violent material. It got very edgy. So, admittedly, I'm waiting for some of that stuff. And it's unfair of me to say, like, oh, this is so bland, where's that stuff? Because this is a show that was not made trying to impress anyone. It wasn't like it was made to be a show to last. It was made it was just a sitcom trying to do something a little different. So it's a little more notorious now than it was actually really meant to be, so it's tough to expect a lot from it. But with that being said, I'm waiting for kind of the darker stuff to start happening. Because it's entertaining, but it does the same thing a lot. It kind of works off Chris Elliott being goofy. So I think this show it has an important lesson for a lot of things. Because if you watch Star Trek now, I know it's not a cult following. People will get on my back for that. I know that show is mainstream by this point. But people forget that at first it was canceled because no one was watching it. But then when they came back, everyone loved it. And now Star Trek is the biggest thing ever. But if you watch the original series, it's pretty dated. Like, it did a lot of big things. I'm not saying Get a Life was a show that had the first interracial kiss. That was a big deal. It handled social issues. But it doesn't really hold up to all now. I don't think, at least. So I think that it's important when you go into a show that has kind of it kind of has a history to it, and it's important for doing kind of other things, not just in itself. You just got to consider the other aspects. You can't just look at the show and say, hey, this is bad, this is good. You got to think about the other things. And that's what I'm trying to do with Get a Life. And maybe it's not quite that kind of show, but there's at least enough that's entertaining, dead on, that makes me want to keep watching. And yeah, and this is the kind of show it does have a cult following, because this is it's got a very small group of people that like it, and a lot of times shows that have cult followings are not shows that or movies actually. A lot of things in them are not obvious. There's certain things that fans really like about them that are reasons they didn't really catch on in the mainstream. And this is a show where that's certainly true, because I think sometimes it fails. It actually is prey to the same mistakes that sitcoms have, but then again, sometimes it's making fun of them. So it's kind of a mixed bag. But I think I can see the reasons why this show is a cult following. And I'm not going to talk too much about cult followings, because I know this is a tough conversation. I can't always. It's There's a fine line if you talk to people who are cult fans of certain things. You'll get a lot of disagreement on what it means for something to be a cult film or just like an underseen film that's underrated, because there's a specific word to it. It's also like the same thing as the word camp. Like a lot of people are like, oh, it's cheesy, it's campy, but campy has a very specific meaning, which you don't want to hear me talk about. I looked it up later. That's a different conversation. But so that being said, these episodes of Get a Life are okay. They're not the best, but I'm excited to see what else is going to come and what other ideas they'll bring up. So that's all I got for you guys today.